welcome back everybody to Talking Dogs with Fern and Jeff. And today, we got our buddy Joe Dwyer here with us as well. And,
Fern, Jeff, and Joe.
Uh-oh.
Tough to beat.
There you go.
Say that 3 times.
We have a very special segment for you today. As promised, we are going to be talking about pet loss. And we had a question a couple episodes ago regarding how to deal with the loss of our pets. And I offered my humble experience, and it was a pretty short answer. We usually do our Q&As. We have 60 seconds to answer, Joe, and I just offered my sentiment that there's really no right or wrong way to grieve. That it's a very individual thing, and I shared some things that I do personally because unfortunately I have lost a lot of pets, so I guess that makes me experienced. So I do a lot of writing and write letters to my animals, and I do what I need to do to get through the grieving process. So that's kind of what prompted us to do this segment, and we invited you on because I know you have a wealth of experience and knowledge to offer anyone. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Certainly. Well, thank you. It's always good to be back with both of you guys. We've done a variety of things, some of them quite comical, but all of them, I'm sure, quite helpful to all of your viewing audience. But yes, pet loss is something that we don't like to talk about. It's something that happens, though, and we have to accept the reality that it does happen. And I have some experience. I've been through several classes on pet loss companioning, as it's known. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later on. But it's more of a companioning process than it is a counseling process. There are those certain circumstances where a person really has some deep-seated problems and issues that are maybe even beyond the pet loss. And then, truthfully, someone like myself and the people that I work with in this area are really not equipped to handling those, so we really do recommend people to a trained professional counselor. But getting back to your issue and the question that came up, I applaud you for a great answer. The answer that Jeff gave is what was most effective for him. And the best way to handle this difficult time in your life is what is best for you. So although, in a sense, as a companion, we might put out certain possibilities to a person that might work for yourself, journaling, as you put it, writing letters, even writing letters from the deceased animal to yourself, which is another very effective technique and helps with a lot of areas, especially in guilt. Because we know that, one of those difficult decisions in euthanasia, and then what sets in immediately in 99% of the people, and I understand, guilt. So when you write a letter from your pet to yourself, they would never offer guilt. That's just not the way they are. That's why we love them so much.
It's interesting you bring up guilt because I just, a lot of the dogs that I've had to make untimely decisions, like euthanasia, for instance, I know a lot of you viewers out there have either experienced this or maybe even going through it right now. I had a 13-year-old dog who was sick and was dying, and I know I absolutely made the right decision, and it was very simple, and I knew that he lived his life and he had a wonderful life, and he ultimately succumbed to a brain tumor. And although it was difficult and I felt all the same emotions, guilt was the first one, even though I knew it was the right thing. I've had dogs 5 years old, severe health issues again, and for a variety of reasons, guilt always comes up. Why is that?
It is because of the circumstance that we're faced to make that decision. But what really is the component that people have to remember is the decision wasn't really made by yourself. The decision was made by the disease. Mm-hmm. And that's what we collectively, myself included, because we really see our human nature when this sinks in, because guilt is a natural first reaction. But what happened in the situation you just described was the brain tumor and the illness, as it progressed, took the decision from you. It really did. Mm-hmm. That was where the decision was really made. We think it's made by us, but in fact, it's made by the disease. And then, as I try to counsel people and tell them, that it is the ultimate act of love that you are providing at that difficult moment, because you're taking it upon yourself to give peace and consolation to the dog, in this case, that's suffering. So that usually helps, but that realization is something that's very important.
I think a lot of people also then go into the game of the should-haves. I could have done this, I should have done this, and they start to beat themselves up over all the things they might have been able to do to squeeze out a couple more weeks or to help their health. And I think that they just beat themselves up.
Exactly, and that stems from guilt, and that stems from what more could I have done, because we think that we can do more in that situation where realistically we can't. But that's where we get into the self-care options that people can do, and that's why sometimes I do recommend, especially if the guilt is at that level, what would have the dog said to you? What would he have said to you? If he could have spoken at that moment, what do you think he would have said to you? You think he would have said, yeah, you're going to feel guilty. Yeah, you really should have done more. No, they're not. They know that we love them, take care of them right up until that last moment, and inclusive of that decision. So that's why sometimes that is an effective technique to help people, is to write the letter from the dog to yourself.
That's such a great perspective that I never would have thought of. And I could see how helpful it could be just in a situation like you just described.
Yeah, especially if you're going to write a letter from your dog to yourself. I mean, unless you're really beating the heck out of yourself, you're generally going to be open-minded enough to write that letter from the dog's point of view. Like, hey, thanks for all those walks. Thanks for throwing the ball. Thanks for doing all you did for me. Is that kind of what you're looking for when you're writing that letter?
Exactly. Starting to honor the story, starting to honor the life of the dog. And what was that mostly about? It was mostly about all the things that you're just saying, and then some, right? All the love, all the care that you gave that dog. And that's what they would express. Let's face it, we know. I mean, we can get inside their minds, we can do it. That's a little scary, but we do it. But when we get inside their minds in this context, in a serious way, we really do know that that's what they would be expressing to us. So that works for some people, but like you started out saying, there are different things for different people. Some people would rather not write it out, but maybe take a walk, and a walk where they spent the time walking that dog, and then just kind of run it through their mind as they go through that part of their remembrance. So it varies per person, as you had pointed out, and I think that's important to know, but it certainly is one possible good technique to think about.
Are there any tools or websites you could direct people to, maybe for pet loss counseling?
Definitely. I am vice president of a group called the Association for Pet Loss and Bereavement. So it's the APLB.org is the website. And I have to say that, when I first assisted them and started to get involved with them, I was unsure how the chat rooms would work. But I have to say that it really does help a tremendous percentage of people. The chat rooms are done on almost every night of the week. There's even an anticipatory grief one that's on the schedule if you go on the website. There's a host, there's a couple of assistant hosts, and there's usually at least a dozen people, believe it or not, ranging from a very fresh loss, and some people are back after 6 months or a year after the loss of their beloved companion animal. And, the counselors and the companions try to walk them through certain aspects of where they're at. And really, we get a lot of positive comments. But when you think about you're helping people literally all over the world, I mean, we've had people in the chat rooms from Singapore. We've had people in the chat rooms from Australia.
Wow.
So, it really is, again, I'd rather be a face-to-face person and sit with somebody. But absent of that, you could see how this could be a very valuable place for them to be.
Great. So let me ask you a question. Not that I lost my dog, but let's say I know someone who lost my dog. Is there anything that I should or shouldn't do as far as, because we have a tendency, we want to console people, we want to make them feel better, we want to take their grief away. We might even be of the mindset, boy, I wish I could have all this pain for myself and take it away from you. I mean, what should or shouldn't we do?
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising, not surprising. I find the need to talk a little too much, as always, and, when I don't know what to say and I just start talking, it's usually not constructive or helpful at all. So I would love some guidance, how I maybe can maybe support someone a little bit better.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. And in fact, the first thing probably to realize is that although you really wish you could take the pain away, that's not what you're there for. You're really there to journey with them, to companion with them. And the expectation is really just to be there for them. So yeah, our first thought is that, especially because it's obviously a heartfelt situation, and it's a situation, and most times it's somebody that we know, but even if it isn't, because of our love for these animals, and especially the dogs in our life, we want to take the pain away. That's the first thing to stop yourself on. Do not take the pain away. Just journey with the person, and then acknowledge their emotions. Acknowledge them. It's very interesting because we realize how different we can be. As much as we're similar in some of our thought processes, the way we live our lives, when grief comes in, it's a very unique way of expressing it. So where I might get very angry for a certain amount of time, Fern, you might be very saddened, and Jeff, you might be just very quiet. But we're all in a similar place. So I think a lot of people will come to me and say, I really don't understand why it's 2 weeks later and I'm still angry. Well, why not? As long as that anger is kept under control, we can't take it too far. But just to acknowledge them, to say it's okay to feel that the way you do. And the other thing I would just say, as far as that question goes, is that our inkling is to say, yeah, I know how you feel, and that's a dangerous place to be. To express something like, I can understand a little bit about what you're going through. If you think about just that phrase versus I know how you feel, they're two very different phrases. To say I know how you feel is a dangerous place to be, and the reason is every relationship is different. Your relationship with your dog and mine with my dog are different. They might be very similar, but they might be different enough, and the circumstances surrounding the death might have been very, very different. So you have to try to steer clear of that overused, well-intentioned, but somewhat difficult statement to make.
I found that people have said that to me in other circumstances, and I thought exactly that. Like, no, you don't. What are you saying that for? You have no idea what I'm going through, And I could see how they mean well, and it seems like it's almost like a programmed response a lot of times. That, okay, this is what I'm supposed to say. But I think in a situation like that, you really have to think before you talk, and think about how this other person is going to take whatever you're saying.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
So how do you feel about I guess grief has a process, whether it's denial or blame or guilt. I think there's so many different ways we could describe that. If you want to talk a little bit about that, and more importantly, do we strive for acceptance, or do we just kind of just let it go until we get there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff, because you know what? You have to get past whatever that first onrush of emotion is. What is it going to be? As we said earlier, it's going to be different for each of us. And it's also going to be different in length. But then, yes, if you're pet loss companioning with somebody, at the right time, that's when you try to introduce what is going to bring some healing to the whole situation. And you notice I said some healing, because the reality is, and I know it sounds kind of difficult to accept, but it is true. Loss is forever. It's forever. If you lose your car keys and you never get them back, they're gone forever. And obviously, your car keys are not nearly much as valuable as your beloved animal. So the loss is forever. You're just going to start to introduce healing, and that healing is going to take some time. And it's going to take some strategies, for lack of better words, to try to see what might fit best into the situation, into the person's demeanor and how they're feeling and what other things are going on in their life. And then just kind of guide them in the direction of the healing that's best for them. But yeah, in the beginning stages, it's not about that. It's just about listening. And then I think, when you get to that point of healing, get them to talk about the dog. Get them to talk. Because that really does open up some positive places for the person to be. You'd be surprised. And then it's a timing thing again. So, if it's Fern's dog, you might say, well, listen, Fern, tell me a little bit more about Fluffy. And then next thing you know, Fern is saying, well, Fluffy loved to be out in the backyard running and playing. Well, Fern, did you ever think that maybe if that was Fluffy's favorite place to be, that maybe building a memorial out there, maybe a rock or something with Fluffy's name on it in the place in the backyard where she liked it the most, and then there's an aha, just to put it out there as a possibility. So that just brings in the healing, but only after you're honoring and listening to the story.
I think that's kind of important. Personally, me, my personality in situations like that, I'm more inclined to just shut down and bottle things up. And I think a thoughtful person just doing some gentle questioning like that, I think would really help bring this stuff out and help me open up instead of keeping everything inside. So I think that's really important, especially for a person like myself. I need some of that, very considerate nudging to help me open up and deal with a lot of this stuff instead of just trying to bottle it up.
Yes. Yeah, and you're right. That's what I like the way you phrased it. Consider it nudging, because that's exactly what it is. You have to be, and it's also about timing. I do recall very vividly, mentioning some strategies a little too early on in the process, and the person did recoil, and understandably so, because I was premature. But interestingly, several months later, the woman came back and said, "You know what? I started to do that, and it happened to be journaling, interestingly." And they said, "Well, that really did start to help me out." So it really is a timing thing, and that's why I keep going back to the word, you're companioning with the person.
Yeah.
If you're walking alongside of them, you're not leading them, you're not pushing them from behind, you're walking alongside of them, you're really identifying then what the proper time is for everything to help them through this, honestly difficult journey.
My next question might be a little selfish, and I apologize out there, but
I'm sure other people have
it's all about me. And unlike Fern, if I see you on the street and I'm grieving, I'll cry right on your shoulder.
So will I.
Pretty much what you see is what you get. All kidding aside, and I know not that I struggle with it. I hate to use that word, but pets that I've lost years ago. The majority of the time now, I look at their picture and I smile. I think of all the good things. But sometimes I'll be walking by and, I feel all the grief come back again it might be a short period of time, but I feel that. Is that normal? Is that residual? Can you talk about that?
Certainly. It's extremely normal.
Okay.
And I will tell you that there will always be, that's why, as I said earlier, that loss, it's permanent, However, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but over that time, did the positive memories start to overtake the not so positive?
Always.
That's what you're looking for then. Because you're always going to have maybe that anniversary date, the date that you brought them home, the date that, whatever you might remember, your own birthday, whatever it is for each person, that will bring back a little bit of a tearful memory. That's okay. As long as you're journeying in that place where the positive things start to overcome the negative ones. And that's where you want to be. It's an interesting way somebody put it, but, your heart is made up as you start out without a dog in your life as a human heart. And then, as a dog enters your human heart, it takes over part of that human heart. And then when that dog unfortunately leaves you, that part is ripped out temporarily. But then as those positive memories start to come back in, then it's replaced in an even more awesome way. Until one day, if you've had enough dogs in your life, you have a dog's heart.
Wow,
it's a good place to be.
That is some pretty good imagery.
Yeah, it is, right?
That explains my housebreaking issue.
I can't take credit for it, but that's pretty good imagery. Yeah,
That's really good.
Yeah, that's very cool. It is, yeah.
One thing I want to talk about a little bit is I find that a lot of people, when they're either grieving with the loss of their pet, and maybe they're going to work, and non-animal people or non-dog people are, let's say, less than sympathetic, or it's just a dog, get over it. Like, how does one deal with that kind of, I want to say ignorance or just insensitivity for not understanding how important our animals mean to us?
Difficult place to be, because unfortunately, and I see some progress in this area, but I don't know if we'll ever see the progress that I believe we should see, in the sense that people honoring this as a real loss to people. There's still a very high percentage that will obviously make that comment that makes us all cringe. Oh, come on, it was just a dog. To the extent possible, not a difficult place to be, but not an easy place to be, I should say. But to the extent possible, you need to try to say the person didn't do it maliciously. The person did it out of ignorance. And most times I think we can say that it is out of ignorance. There's a difference. So if it's ignorance, try to just accept it as ignorance. And then what I usually try to recommend to people there is probably like the three of us would do. Go to the people that you know. If it happened to one of us tomorrow, we would probably go to one another. And that's where you want to be then. You want to be in the place where you feel the most comfort, where you know you're going to get the most comfort, and as understanding as to the best extent possible. So, you just have to accept it as where it's coming from. And then I always tell people, go back to the people that are going to make you most peaceful.
Man, I think a lot of people get very frustrated and angry by that because they're in a very emotional state.
Sure.
I think it's just important to realize that, like, these people are not doing it to be harmful. They just don't understand that kind of perspective.
Yeah.
But that's a great point. You got to find people who do understand, and those are the people you should go to.
And the reality that we know, and I tell people because they understand this, because it's a whole other area of people will say, well, what's the right time for me to get another dog?
Oh,
You know, and there you open up a whole other discussion. And that's an individual decision.
Yeah.
I know people who went literally less than a month later, and I know myself, it took years. But the reality is, whether you go a month later or whether you go years later, you have to put into your head or try to get into the person's head that dog is not a replacement for the one that passed away. It's another great dog in your life, but they're going to be different. They all have different personalities, as we know as trainers, right?
Yeah.
And they all have different places in our life. You know, for the one that passed away when I was a child, I mean, you know, and to your point earlier, Jeff, you know, I still get a teary moment. And you're talking about 25 years ago, he passed away. So, you know, to bring that realization in that, you know, it's a different dynamic again for each person in that regard as well.
How do you feel? I mean, 'cause like the whole, oh, it's just a dog thing and dealing with those types of people, it makes me think, you know, that, I mean, grief is grief, loss is loss. I mean, whether you lose your grandmother or your dog, like you said earlier, it's all about the relationship. I mean, is there really a difference between losing a family member or a four-legged family member?
There's no difference at all. As a matter of fact, you know, I can't tell you the number of people who have said to me, either in the chat room or personally, all right, explain this to me because I'm having a tough time gripping with this. But I had a tougher time when my dog died than when my grandfather died. Well, I don't think we need to explain that.
Yeah.
You know, what happens though is that the person is saying that maybe not as much trying to understand their own feelings, but trying to make it fit into what the society says. And our society says that losses are ranked in certain places, you know, and in some degree there is a certain degree of truth to that, but let's face it, it's not 100% true, right? So yes, there's no doubt that people will, and then just to bring that to their attention, you know, and sometimes sharing, as I know you had told me at one point, sharing your own experiences in that appropriate way helps a person, you know, kind of get through that, because the society's telling them something completely different.
Interesting.
You know.
How do you feel about it? So I know a couple of questions we got that were in the same topic. And, you know, Fern has, you know, Haley, she's 11 years old. I have Amber, she's 10 and a half years old. And, you know, like you said, each relationship's individual. And although I've been through the loss of many pets before, and, you know, Fern's got an 11-year-old, I got a 10 and a half-year-old dog. Is there anything people can do to prepare themselves for the ultimate, you know, when their dogs are on the latter half of their life as opposed to the earlier half?
There is, and you know, here's a place where we're in a similar place. I have a 10 and a half year old who's quite ill that you know about, and there is. I think there's a couple of things to do. I mean, it may sound kind of like, you know, soap opera-ish, if you will, but you know, to enjoy each day, really be that much more accepting their love and giving them that much more love. I think that's important because, you know, the reality is that, you know, when they get to that point, that you have to realize that that day will come at some point. You don't know when it is coming. But I think also, you know, to the extent you can, and some people don't want to do this, but I've had more people than not come back and say to me, yeah, I should have done that. Think about what aftercare options you want to pursue, you know. Now, there's laws about, you know, burying your pet, you know, and we have to acknowledge what the law is, so I can't go there.
Can you explain for people who aren't familiar with the law?
Well, the law is that in New Jersey, you're not supposed to bury your pet on your property. That is the law. Now, if somebody chooses to do it, I think the only obligation is to let them know at least that the law is this. If they still choose to do it, and, you know, well, you know, maybe that's just the way it is. But there are other aftercare options that you could look into, and I think to at least have an idea in your mind of what you would want to do. I had somebody not that long ago who I did explain several options to them. They listened to me, they were appreciative of all of them, but it was a little unconventional, at least from what I've seen, but their decision was, after the dog had passed away, They just left the body with the veterinarian and didn't want or need to know where the remains were going to be placed. That's not the most common thing, but it was what brought this family, and this family was made up of a husband, a wife, and 2 children. They spoke about it. They all were at peace with it. So I guess that's really all that matters. Now I know that's all that matters.
No, I
They
think
were at peace with it.
that's really important because, as sad as it is to think about now, to me, think about, my dog Haley, getting to that point. I don't want to have to make an emotional decision at that time, and like an impulse emotional decision, and then regret it later. So I think it's important to think about it, at least have a general idea of, when that time comes, what would be the best thing for you to do, because otherwise you're not going to be in a place to be able to make decisions, and at the time you may have to make a fairly quick decision to determine what happens next.
No doubt, that's why I do recommend it for that reason. And although, again, a little difficult to express, but I want to put it out there. If you are going to make that decision to have your dog cremated, ask the question: is this an individual cremation? There are a lot of places that do group cremations, and you might not know that unless you ask that question. So if that's your wish, is to have your beloved pet individually cremated, make sure you ask the question that is what either the facility or the hospital does. So there are options there, and that's why it does pay to look around a little bit beforehand.
Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. Great point. And on the topic of cremation, now we're in New Jersey, so I know we have a couple of facilities here. Is there any resources anywhere someone can go to, or do they just bounce it off their veterinarians as far as finding a reputable organization that will, if you want an individual cremation, 100% you're getting an individual cremation?
Well, there's certainly the ability to check through the internet and check around. You can ask your veterinarian, and certainly that's another option. The other option, which again isn't for every person, but most places, they should allow you to stay if you in fact want to stay. Now, you don't have to stay for the entire procedure, but you should be able to at least stay, see the retort as it's known, cremation unit for, as I put it, English, and then, is your dog the only one that's going into the machine at that time, so that the cremains that are coming out are. You could, some people do elect to stay for the entire process. I would recommend that if a place says to you, well, no, we don't allow you to stay, I truthfully wouldn't do business with them. That would be my one firm recommendation. If that in fact is your desire. To have only your pet's cremains in that urn and that receptacle, whatever you choose. And there are some beautiful things that, urns, there are some really beautiful options out there. But again, the person might want something very simple, or they might want something very elaborate. But there's a range going from the very simple to the very elaborate.
Sure. Excellent. So before we close, can you just talk a little bit about your goings-on? I know you have a lot going on right now, but talk about your books, talk about your website, give the viewers a little tidbit on Joe Dwyer.
And I should mention to you that we did just talk about in an earlier episode Daniel and his quest to be the hero dog award. So they do know about you already. This is Daniel's faithful companion.
Daniel's faithful companion, Daniel's driver, Daniel's chauffeur, Daniel's business manager, doesn't make any money.
When you want to talk to Daniel, you got to go through it.
Daniel is really on a great mission. Daniel, as you probably know, was the dog that survived the gas chamber back in October of last year. He is definitely in demand right now in other states that still use the gas chamber legally in their particular state, of which there's still 30 in our country.
Wow.
Which a lot of people do, as I did, raise their eyebrows and say, you can't be serious, but yes, I am, unfortunately. We are going to Michigan in May of this year, next month, in the hopes that we can get the ball rolling there. Pennsylvania, we've made great strides. We look as if we're going to have the gas chamber banned, and it'll be called Daniel's Law there, and hopefully within the next month or two. Government red tape moves at government red tape's pace, but we accept that, or we we have to accept that. But more than that, Daniel is on another mission to really try to promote adoptions. I feel as if it's great that he's getting a lot of attention in this area of banning the gas chamber, but of course it shouldn't just end there. If the same number of dogs and companion animals are being euthanized in other ways, we've made some progress, but in my mind not enough. So promoting adoptions is another place where I'd love to see him, and he has been as late as yesterday at an adoption event. And in addition, this dog, I mean, you've both met him. He has an incredible attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, just a great canine attitude. I put him in the top 5% of canine personalities. Just very loving, just genuine kind of personality. The adversity that he overcame, and to have that personality, I think is a human lesson that can be taken for a lot of people. So please visit his website, danielthebeagle.com, and he is up for Hero Dog Award.
Excellent.
At first I was a little hesitant about it, truthfully, but on the other hand, I realized if his story continues and this picks up steam for it, it's going to help that many more dogs out there. So I felt as if it was a good avenue to pursue. And of course there's Shelby, as we share the love of pit bulls, and we know that pit bulls unfortunately do not get the credit that they deserve, and Shelby, like dogs that you know and have, is a therapy dog, and she does some wonderful things. She brings compassionate care to people that I will go as far as to say no human can.
Yeah.
And I witnessed that, and I'm simply amazed by it, but amazed in a good way for a change.
Sure.
So,
Well, hey, man, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for joining us.
Always
We
a
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
And we're going to link to all that great stuff about Joe and everything in our show notes below this video. If you're not watching it on the Talking Dogs website, you can head over there and you can see all the links that we talked about in this episode. So you want?
You talk about the next show. I mean,
See, I was going to let him
Yeah.
talk finally, and he's going to bring it
he's
right
so
back to me.
selfless, you
I'm in
know.
the middle here, so
So how do you break this up?
flip a coin.
So, just like Shelby, who is an awesome pit bull, Jeff and I also have awesome pit bulls, and pit bulls are very near and dear to our heart. So we want to talk a little about pit bulls next episode. We're going to talk about responsible pit bull ownership, as well as how we can better promote pit bulls in society, because if there ever was an underdog, it's pit bulls. So that's it. So we'll see you for the next episode. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Later. Ciao, everybody.
Bye.